Good evening, everybody. Buenas noches a todos. ¿Cómo están? Thank you so much for joining the inaugural Climate Equity LA series. I'm Marta Segura, the founding director of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office at the City of LA. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this series, and particularly our remarkable speakers who have been integral to our creation and vision for this one-of-a-kind series. I also want to thank the Liberty Hill Foundation, our steadfast partner, for helping us to create and execute this three-part series, and the Curriculum Design Committee, most of whom will be speaking in today's lunch and panel. The Design Committee includes our region's finest environmental justice, social justice, and tenant rights organizations, as well as climate experts from UCLA, the city, and Los Angeles County. We must collaborate because climate and pollution don't recognize borders, and we must be as seamless as possible in the execution of our policies. I want to thank every elected official and every organization listed in our program, and especially those in our launch today who have been instrumental to our success. So why must we center this virtual series and the city's climate policies with equity and health at the forefront? We aren't only addressing climate because it's the morally right thing to do. If we don't apply equity guardrails to create policy and invest in climate infrastructure to transform our economy, we won't save our planet and we won't save our climate. We just can't achieve climate goals while an extractive economy continues to flourish without equity as the through line. It's our responsibility to develop a new and regenerative model that must work to achieve social and ecological well-being for all. There are deep intersections among climate, biodiversity, equity, health, jobs, housing, and just economics. Many are aware of the Biden-Harris Justice 40 initiative and how California has been creating state legislation to adequately invest up to 40% of our infrastructure funds to disinvested and disadvantaged communities. This would go a long way in achieving our climate goals, but we must operationalize and execute climate equity through accounting practices, contracts administration, and planning with equity metrics for this to work. Climate equity is also a human rights and civil rights issue. The historical disinvestment in redline communities concentrated polluters and extractive industries in these areas that lacked resources. And this has resulted in more suffering and harm with diseases like asthma, cancer, autoimmunity, birth defects, to name a few, which in turn shortens lives and limits their ability to reach their full potential. These are known as the sacrifice zones or fence line communities. And in the city of LA, Wilmington, Pacoima, Boyle Heights, and Watts are examples of this, but many more have been identified with the state's CalEnviro screen tool. The impacts of climate change increase housing instability for low-income communities and communities of color who have faced systemic exclusion from wealth building in the housing market for generations. Climate change intersects with many areas of economic and racial justice in relation to housing, which is one reason why we must address this issue in our series and in building decarbonization policies. So what is the Climate Equity LA series going to do about all of this? Well, our vision is to put community leadership first and demand that we develop a collaborative governance structure between community stakeholders and the city of LA. Systems change requires a unified approach from all people at all levels. Those living in the sacrifice zones must advocate alongside those that live in areas like Rancho Park or Silver Lake to reach those goals. This is why it was important to have people from all of LA with us today, providing their guidance to do this right. The model we are creating is derived from a resident identified needs model, giving community members much more ownership over policies such as mapping climate resilience hubs and EV charging stations, or the electrification of new low-income and middle-income homes, identifying financing for retrofits of older and existing buildings, and electric appliances. Blueprint slide, please, Ray. This visual that you're about to see before you represents our model for change at the City of LA. We're calling it the Climate Equity Innovative Governance Model, where we prioritize policy areas with frontline communities and communities across Los Angeles, create and co-design workshops and focus groups with community wisdom and experts. Then we share that knowledge through the Climate Equity LA series. We gather data, analyze it, and put it into an equitable climate action report, which we're calling our roadmap, give it to the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission for them to deliberate on and endorse, and they will then deliver that and bring it to our city council. So that's what makes this whole process unique, and what makes this series different. It's not just an exercise in learning or education. It's an exercise in gathering your guidance, your input to help shape policy through an advisory mechanism at the City of Los Angeles. So now it is my pleasure to introduce you to Councilmember Mitchell Farrell, our environmental justice champion, who has been developing key policies to decarbonize LA and create zero emissions grid. Sir?
Martha, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, friends. Thanks for having me here today and joining the very first CEMO Climate Equity Series. It's very exciting. And congratulations on your outreach and participation. This looks amazing. Activism has always been part of who I am from a very young age. Being a steward of our natural environment, an advocate for international peace during the Cold War, and very close to home, fighting for my neighbors and my neighborhood for a better quality of life with a healthy environment at the center of that value. It is particularly gratifying for me to work with all of you and my friend Martha Segura on and the rest of the CEMO staff and volunteers. And it's a very exciting moment in the city. Together, we will work to ensure that all of our policies and initiatives are based in community, and that means all of you, along with science and data. The facts are clear. The social and health costs of carbon, methane, nitrogen oxide, and other emissions are very real. They've always impacted working class and communities of color directly and tragically by design. I grew up in large part in rural Oklahoma, once next to a rail yard where railroad ties were stacked and soaked in creosote. I know what it's like to come home with nosebleeds and feeling nausea. I know what it's like to have my older brother taken to the emergency room because of his asthma when he was a child. Another time, we lived near a tire burning pit. So I remember all of these very imprinted strongly in my background. And all of these things we experienced, just like so many in the city of Los Angeles, we felt this just because of our economic status, left us little choice but to live near these sites. And the same can be said for today in these sites in Los Angeles that we have where there's petroleum production. Like all of you, I'm focused on building household and transportation decarbonization. In fact, just today in the committee that I chair, the Energy, Climate Change, Environmental Justice, and Los Angeles River Committee, we approved the Los Angeles City Electric Vehicle Master Plan. And it's been a collaboration of all city departments, their fleets, parks, libraries, and more. The hard work of combating the climate crises is of paramount and urgent concern. And like you, I'm focused on our ever-warming planet and our imperative to take action locally. In October of last year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change at the United Nations released its latest report outlining the severity of our climate crises. According to the IPCC, the world needs to take urgent action today if we have a shot at keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius this century. Finally, thanks again to all the work done in partnership with our Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, everyone here today, and to the many individuals and communities that will work to save our planet. You've got a lot of introductions today, and I know my great colleagues and environmental champions, Paul Krikorian and Paul Koretz, are going to speak later, but I look forward to collaborating with all of you moving forward to reach our climate goals. And again, they're not just goals, they are imperatives. So I'm in it for the long haul, and I know all of you are as well. Thanks again, Martha, and let's have a great meeting today.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Farrell. I really appreciate that. Now, I have the pleasure and honor of introducing you to Councilmember Paul Koretz. He championed the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office and has been championing many environmental policies for many years. We wouldn't be here without him. Councilmember Paul Koretz.
Well, hi, everyone, and thank you so much for attending. Tonight is the realization of more than 5 years of work between my office and the mayor's office and the rest of the city council with a group that became known as the LEAP LA Coalition. And I want to thank them and Marta Segura and Liberty Hill Foundation for putting together this great series. Now, to emphasize why we needed a climate emergency mobilization office, I want to talk about the importance of community organizing and moving our DWP forward on important climate goals. But I also want to underline the unintended consequences and environmental justice impacts of our policy decisions. When I was elected to the city council back in 2009, I was the first council member to sign on to the LA Beyond Coal campaign. DWP said it couldn't be done, but thanks to an enormous push from the advocates, including many who are with us tonight, 2 Decembers ago, we demolished once and for all the Navajo Generating Station, one of the largest, most polluting coal plants in the nation. This was an enormous win for the climate, an enormous win for community organizing, and that power plant and coal mine were responsible for an inordinate amount of air and water pollution inflicted upon the indigenous lands of the Navajo and the Hopi. Yet another tragedy may have occurred from closing down the Navajo Generating Station and the Kayenta coal mine, which fed it. Doing so eliminated 800 indigenous jobs in a region where there aren't many economic opportunities. And ready for the kicker, the Navajo and Hopi nations did not receive any power from that generating station ever. Many, if not most, still live without electricity or running water. As we address the climate crisis, we need a whole new approach so that LA is not the center of the extractive economy, but the center of a new holistic approach, a living economy where everyone benefits from the positive steps we're taking. One of our goals with the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office is to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. If LA opens a power plant or any kind of facility, we need to make sure there are not negative impacts on the local people and the local environment. LA's footprint is enormous. It stretches along with our current and proposed transmission lines from Oregon and Washington State to Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming, Arizona, and New Mexico, and beyond. The oil that gets refined in our refineries, for another example, comes from as far away as Yasuni National Park in Ecuador, and then we burn it in our cars, and the rainforest is going up in smoke from our tailpipes. Locally, it's even more important. The tenets of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office are to put frontline communities, indigenous communities, labor communities in leadership positions on our Climate Emergency Commission, and to hold community assemblies in the 7 most polluted parts of the city to better understand how our climate policies will impact those who are already suffering the most damage from pollution and climate breakdown. And as we move towards 100% renewable energy, we need to be certain we raise all boats and that no one's left behind. Council members O'Farrell and Krikorian and I have all been working hard together with our colleagues to make that a reality. Together, we're making sure we're replacing the Navajo Generating Station jobs with solar jobs. And through a program called Light Up Navajo, bringing electricity at last to the nation who provided LA with energy for 5 decades. And thank you, Mr. O'Farrell, for leading that effort. As we address important policies like building decarbonization and electrification of transportation, we need to be sure everyone wins in a similar way. We need to be sure that all of you win as we make this great once-in-a-lifetime transition. And as part of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, we sometimes have to move slow to move fast. Once we have this bulletproof coalition of environmental justice groups, environmental groups, and labor, we will be unstoppable. But we have to do it right, we have to be just, and we have to create and replace any jobs lost. Nobody wins unless everybody wins. This is the start of something that will change the planet by changing our city. And I'm glad all of you are here to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Koretz, for those insightful remarks. Now I'd like to introduce someone we're proud to have his wisdom, we're proud to have his support, and we're proud to have him spearheading energy justice through LA 100, and we're also proud to have his guidance for ending oil extraction in LA. Councilmember Krikorian.
Well, thank you very much, Marta, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to all of you for your participation tonight. I especially want to thank Marta and her whole staff, our commissioners for participating tonight, and all of the city staff and my colleagues on the council. But I especially want to thank all of the community members and leaders who are participating tonight, because that is what the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office is all about. Bringing in your participation into the policy making that we're doing in the city that I believe can change the world. Thanks very much to the Repower LA Coalition, the LEAP LA Coalition, all of the green building community and the Mayor's Office of Sustainability for bringing us to tonight. And especially, I want to thank Councilmember Koretz because he's kind in his comments about me and about President O'Farrell, Chairman O'Farrell, excuse me, but truly this evening has been Mr. Koretz's vision for as long as I can remember. And it was through sustained effort over many, many years that he pressed us forward on the council. So look, I don't think anybody on this call needs any speeches about how important the climate emergency is right now. We don't need to go into a lot of examples about that. We all know this. But the reason for community input like this is so important is because we're implementing world-leading policies in Los Angeles already. We're driving forward on this issue with things like, as was mentioned, LA 100, by which the largest municipal utility in America will be producing 100% clean energy by 2035. We've begun the process of phasing out all oil and gas extraction in every square inch of the city of Los Angeles, something that just a few years ago was seen as being entirely impossible. We're working to shut down the Valley Generating Station and otherwise try to protect some of the neighborhoods that have been around our in-basin generation that have been so adversely impacted by it. And as Chairman O'Farrell mentioned, just today, we took dramatic action to advance the electrification of the transportation sector by planning a comprehensive infrastructure for electric vehicles throughout the city of Los Angeles in every neighborhood. And so these are, some pretty big policy agendas. But as they get implemented, how they impact different communities is extremely important. How they affect jobs, how they affect consumers, ratepayers, very, very important. And that's where the broad input of stakeholders throughout the city of Los Angeles is going to be so important. And over the course of these next few sessions, we're going to be focusing on decarbonization of the built environment, which is sort of the next big frontier that we have to address. Nearly half of the greenhouse gas emissions in Los Angeles come from energy used to cool, heat, and power our buildings. That's more even than the transportation sector. So it's vitally important that we address this specific aspect of the climate emergency. And that's something that will affect not only the globe, but also everyone who's living and working in those buildings by providing healthier indoor air quality, cleaner air in our neighborhoods, lower utility bills, more comfortable and safe places to live, more resiliency in the case of emergencies. All of those things are benefits besides the global benefit that can come from decarbonization of our built environment. So How we do that is very much going to depend on the input that all of you are providing into this process. So I really thank you very much for your participation. And I just want to leave one final thought, because when we talk about the climate emergency with the urgency that we need to bring to it, it's easy to become hopeless. It's easy to think, how are we ever going to impact this global catastrophe that's in front of us? And I know that we can do that because I've seen what we've done as a society throughout the course of my lifetime. When I was growing up and we had second-degree smog alerts in the valley and we couldn't go out because of air pollution, I compare that to where we are now. Long way to go, but the progress has been phenomenal. When you look at our water use, we've added over 1 million new water customers in Los Angeles and not added one single drop of water consumption because we've emphasized conservation and so forth. When you look at the fact that the world was endangered by damage to the ozone layer, and then through policy changes, we were able to repair that damage. There's countless examples of environmental catastrophe that we've faced just over the last few decades that we were able to avoid by concerted activism that developed thoughtful policy, which has then become part of our larger society and our culture. We can do the same thing with climate change, but it's going to take concerted effort, it's going to take concerted engagement, and it's going to take smart policy based on the input that all of you are going to be providing through this process. So I thank you all very much in advance for that.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Krikorian. Definitely words that we will take through the series and reflect upon. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Mayor Eric Garcetti's Chief Sustainability Officer, Lauren Faber O'Connor. She's been instrumental as a mentor and helping me develop and execute the Mayor's Green New Deal. Lauren?
Thank you, Marta. I really appreciate it, and I'm honored and thrilled to be here tonight. I'm also really proud to have you leading this first ever effort that is the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office. I also want to thank the council members that are here and council president for all of your support. I mean, the three members that are here today, it really is just, it's kind of awe-inspiring, sort of pinch yourself to think how much, you know, you all and your fellow members of the council and my boss, Mayor Garcetti, truly live and breathe the desire and pursuit of climate justice so sincerely. So I couldn't be more proud to be Angelino and to be part of the city as we're pushing through this incredibly important and instrumental work. I also want to recognize the LEAP Coalition, because LEAP LA, I remember when community leaders from the LEAP LA Coalition came to our office with this brilliant but incredibly bold and groundbreaking concept years ago. And Councilmember Koretz, you were there in those meetings and really stuck with us as we figured out together how to make this shared climate governance real. And that's what today is emblematic of, is embarking on that very shared climate governance process, because that's foundational to LA's Green New Deal, equity-focused governance, the prioritization of policies and programs, and of course, the justice-centered implementation of our climate work. And this series and everyone's participation in it is so important to informing the city of your priorities, but also helping us keep you completely up to date on the big actions that we're taking, that we're looking to take, what we see on the horizon, and how we need everyone's involvement. So we built that iteration and consultation and certainly ambition into LA's Green New Deal. And we intend to always be looking at how we increase ambition. And that comes with the coalition that our previous council members have been discussing, because we know that everything we do here to embed equity and justice in our implementation doesn't just sit here. It sits in the way we do housing. It sits in the way we approach transportation and the way we approach energy. And it also gets noticed beyond Los Angeles. We are developing models for other cities and for the country and beyond. You know, Martha, you referenced Justice 40. I don't think that didn't just come out of nowhere. You know, that came out of looking at models from elsewhere, and they're certainly looking at LA. So today is really just the beginning. This office is groundbreaking in and of itself, and we're all here to make it a success and to sustain a climate just future well beyond any one of our terms. And so we're excited because this is really intended to, you know, connect people across multiple sectors and really connect community leaders into city processes. And I know that others have mentioned things like LA 100 or the recent amazing action we've taken to begin the process to phase out oil drilling in Los Angeles. Now, that effort by the Stand LA Coalition, you know, that took over 10 years to get to where we are. And we don't have that kind of time to do the work that is needed to reinforce and deliver on our climate justice and climate equity commitments. We don't have 10 years for every major initiative that we need to pursue to reach carbon neutrality and to protect communities from the impacts of climate change. So that's why the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, our commissioners, and this series is so important, is to remove those kinds of barriers and get over that kind of timeline that we've seen in delivering justice to communities historically. So I'm inspired by all of your participation, and I'm so looking forward to hearing from everybody, not just today, but going forward, because I know that what we're doing here is really going to become foundational to all the future work across Los Angeles. All of our departments are paying attention, are represented. You know, we are embedding this work throughout the city. That's what the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office is intended to do. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Those are great words. And next, I'd like to introduce Capri Maddox. As I said earlier, climate justice and environmental equity are civil and human rights issues. And Capri has been a mentor and a guide, and I really enjoying working with her because our work is so interconnected. So next, I give you Capri Maddox, the General Manager of the Civil, Human Rights and Equity Department. Capri?
Thank you so much, Marta. And I really appreciate you for launching this important conversation with the community. We are grateful to Mayor Garcetti and our leaders like council members Kokorian, Koretz, and O'Farrell, and our entire city council and leadership for creating this much needed office and for appointing you as a great leader for this space for such a time as this. I want to thank, again, I want to echo Lauren's comments about Stand LA for their support in banning oil wells and phasing out existing ones in Los Angeles once and for all. It's a big step for justice, and I hope that future efforts in this space don't take as much time, because I hope we're all educated about what needs to happen and why. I definitely want to shout out the Public Works Department, which houses this office and has been a champion for meeting our city's ambitious climate goals. Some of you may know that the Public Works Department is very dear to me because I served as the president of the Board of Public Works under Mayor Villaraigosa. And so I just love that you are continuing to move forward some of the most important work in this space. One of the more important functions of this office lies within the community. The community members, the community-based organizations that are involved in this office will be key to shaping CEMO's work. And we at the LA Civil Rights Department, known as our name for short, are very excited to support this work. It's clear that no one is safe from the climate emergency. Just earlier this week, the United Nations IPCC issued its most dire warning yet, stating that no nation will be spared the effects of increasing wildfires, drought, and sea level impacts. And we want to be clear. not everyone's going to be affected equally. We know that marginalized communities, indigenous communities, working people have always suffered the greatest environmental injustices. When things go wrong, from COVID to the economy to climate change, marginalized communities are hit first, the fiercest, and they suffer the worst effects. Los Angeles is a case study in environmental justice. From the freeways built on top of redline communities to the food deserts of South and East Los Angeles, very infrastructure was built on inequality. And this is why Black children today are 2 times as likely to have asthma than white children. It is why Latino families are far more likely to live near unplugged oil and gas wells. As a child of Los Angeles, I suffered, I believe it was Councilmember Krikorian talking about smog days. I was one of those kids playing handball at a LAUSD school outdoors on day, we call them smog days, smog alert days. And now I've suffered with asthma for my lifetime. And I see and feel these injustices, and we do not solve the climate crisis without solving these injustices. Clean water and air is a human right, and that is why we look forward to working with Marta, CEMO, and partners like Liberty Hill and other community-based organizations and nonprofits to do what is right and to meet this moment with equity, access, and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Capri. We really appreciate your presence here tonight, and I look forward to working on more projects with you in the future. So next, everybody's been saying LEAP LA. Next, we have our representative, Mauro Kakusian, PSRLA Climate Justice Organizing Manager and LEAP LA representative, who has been guiding this work through the LEAP LA Coalition. Mauro Kakusian.
Thanks, Marta. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mauro Kakusian, and I'm the Climate Justice Organizing Manager with Physicians for Social Responsibility LA. We are a founding member of the LEAP LA Coalition, which includes Communities for a Better Environment, Esperanza Community Housing, Scope, Sacred Places Institute, and Cocoima Beautiful. I want to start by acknowledging the land that Los Angeles was built upon, which is the land and home of the Tongva Nation, the Tataviam Nation, and Chumash Nation. The Tongva people are the original inhabitants and caretakers of the land, and we must honor Indigenous wisdom on stewardship and our relationships with nature. Indigenous peoples were the first to suffer the burdens of climate change and the extractive economy, and have been at the forefront of the struggle to defend Mother Earth for more than 500 years. I'm honored to be with you all today on behalf of PSRLA and LEAP LA. LEAP LA formed in the fall of 2017 in partnership and collaboration from Councilmember Paul Koretz and Naomi Klein. The goal of the coalition was to conceptualize what a citywide mobilization can look like to meet the urgency of addressing the climate change crisis in a way that centered the leadership of frontline communities, those communities that bear the heaviest environmental and climate burdens from the fossil fuel industry. LEAP LA's vision is to transition Los Angeles from being an extractive, fossil fuel-based economy to one that is rooted in the principles of restoration, regeneration, ecological balance, and intersectional justice. We want to decarbonize, detoxify, and democratize and decolonize this city, and we want to do so in a way that ensures communities' lived experiences are at the center. This is how LEAP LA came up with the idea of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, a representative climate commission, and community assemblies. Together, these three aim to institutionalize a participatory model of policymaking that is led by communities from inception to implementation. The CEMO was our vision to institutionalize environmental justice and just transition frameworks for any climate and energy policy moving through City Council. And we are thrilled to see our vision come to fruition with the launch of the Climate Equity LA series. I want to thank Councilmember Koretz, Council President Martinez, Council Members Krikorian, Blumenfield and O'Farrell for your support in establishing the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, and to the Mayor's Office as well for believing in our vision for CEMO. I would also like to give a special thanks to my colleagues Martha Dina Arguello and to Alex Jassett for his work on planning this series, and to Andy Schrader, who was and continues to be a thought partner and leader in this work. And of course, a special thanks and appreciation to Marta Segura, a longtime environmental justice advocate and leader who has graciously stepped into the role as the first acting director of CEMO and who has been doing an excellent job so far. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mauro. Those are really generous, kind words. And I just smiled from ear to ear listening to you just, inspire us all tonight. So Mauro mentioned the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commissioners. So next, I'd like to introduce you to three of our founding commissioners, Commissioner Imelda Padilla, Commissioner Jackie Badejo, and Commissioner Tiana Shaw-Wakeman. We'll start with Commissioner Imelda Padilla, and then she will introduce you to Commissioner Jackie Badejo and so forth. Commissioner Padilla.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to see everybody tonight. Excuse me, but I am losing my voice, so I'm going to try really hard and keep it short. So as mentioned, I'm one of the commissioners, one of the founding commissioners. I was actually appointed by Council President Nuri Martinez. I'm currently a community engagement manager for Heritage Sierra Medical Group. However, I have been spent a very long time already now in my career working with partners like Liberty Hill and being behind some of the most epic community-based policies that have gone through the spaces of City Hall. Some of those including Clean Up, Green Up, and Raise the Wage. And I'm very excited to be here now and to be on the CEMO Commission and part of this series to hear from and work with some of the most well-respected leaders and advocates in environmental justice and social justice. So, I've also wanted to mention, also thanking all of the city leaders that have already been here. I'm excited to hear from the panelists, and thank you to everybody that's bringing us together. My role in this, if we go back to the image that Martha showed us earlier with the icons, our role, it looks to me, my role will be part 5, right? But I just wanted to mention that as a community organizer by trade, you can count on me in being involved in all parts of the process. So thank you again for having me. Looking forward to hearing from the panel tonight and the rest of the Thursdays that we'll all be here together. So now that's enough from me. I'd like to pass it over to Jackie Badejo.
Yes, good evening, everyone. For it is a great honor to be a part of this commission. I am proudly serving as a commissioner for the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office. And I just would like to say that it now is the time. Everyone has been working so hard for so long that this is the perfect opportunity to connect all of the dots so everything could flow. I'd like to also extend a thanks to everyone. I can't name everyone, but most definitely to Liberty Hill for keeping everyone in rotation for so long with the support. I've worked for many organizations, departments and institutions and a lot of communities, which some of our colleagues will be presenting later. And, as a city who is beginning to transition to, equity, diversity, and inclusion-based solutions, like the environment and social justice, housing, education. We talk about workforce development, all these things. We have to make sure that we continue to stay sustainable, and that's the value of this series that we're having this month. So shout out to everyone who is keeping this going. I know it's not easy. I'm just really looking forward to doing the outreach and making sure that everything is moving forward, really collecting the voices of the community so it can be inputted in everything that we do. You know, there's a lot of things. I want to also give a shout out to the Cool Block leaders. I believe we may have some that just graduated, and thank you for your dedication to your city. That's what is most important. We are the fabric of the community, and so as we are present in this month-long series, I offer the task for all of us to be as creative, innovative, and realistic with our vision. So just know that there are no limits. And, you know, remember, it's all about the method. And to all of my Angelinos, we are the metrics. So let's make it happen. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'd like to pass it to my next commissioner. You have the floor.
Hello, my name is Tiana and I serve as a youth commissioner on the CEMC, and I am also an environmental justice coordinator with a local organization called Black Women for Wellness. I recently graduated from USC with degrees in psychology and social entrepreneurship, and while there I did various environmental advocacy projects around divestment and carbon neutrality, and I also served on Mayor Garcetti's Youth Council for Climate Action, where my interest in and understanding of city government really blossomed. I am truly honored. I don't know if I can express how honored I am to be in service of climate equity and justice, because climate solutions really are not solutions unless environmental justice is the focus. Though everyone, absolutely everyone on this planet is being affected by climate change, throughout our history and present, certain communities have been sacrificed. There are people in our county and our city that were intentionally deemed to be less important, that are intentionally disinvested in, and that are dealing with horrible environmental health effects that were intentionally created. Therefore now, the only way we can truly tackle climate change is by creating new intentions, is by creating holistic, equitable climate policies with, by, and for such communities that both remove hazards and chemical plants and oil drills, and also ensure that fence line, indigenous, low income, and communities of color who have already gone through so much now experience the benefits of the green and blue economies. So thank you so much to Marta and Rebecca, to the council members here today, to the mayor's office, to my fellow commissioners, and to the Liberty Hill Foundation for all of your work on this series. And thank you for everybody in attendance for your respective contributions towards advancing climate justice.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Shaw-Wakeman. I really look forward to working with every one of you and have you as part of our commission. All right, well, now we go to the explanation of our design team and our design committee. Basically, the curriculum was developed with the wisdom and support of a fairly large design committee, but representing that design committee today is Gary Giroux, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for LA County. And we're very honored to have LA County here because as I said earlier, climate and air pollution know no borders, know no boundaries, and LA County is a great partner. Gary.
Great. Well, thank you, Marta. We appreciate that, and congratulations on all the great work. And as you point out, you know, the county believes in regional approaches, and we work with all 88 cities. But of course, we have a very special relationship with our friends and partners in the city of Los Angeles, and we've been working with you and all city departments on a lot of important initiatives. So this is just part of that collaboration, and we really appreciate being part of the design team. But really the key point I want to make is this, is that, you know, LA County is committed to being present and to listening to all of the stakeholders here today. We believe that our communities cannot be sustainable if they're not equitable. We also, of course, believe in the principle of ask, don't tell, or put another way, to listen, don't talk. So I'm going to stop talking and just finish up by saying that this is the start of an important process. I want you to all know that we too are here and we want to learn from your experience. So thanks again for including us on the agenda, and let's get to work.
Thank you, Gary. I really appreciate your support. Now it's time to segue. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank everybody who was in the first phase of this presentation. All of the partnerships here from the city, county, community-based organizations, the Liberty Hill Foundation, all of you have been an instrumental part of this vision, and we wouldn't be here without you. Now we're turning to the more, creative part of the session, where we will get more of your input through the chat session, through the chat. The Q&A doc is going to be to your right in the chat session, but you also can input your questions directly into the chat space. Thank you all again. We aren't done yet, but I do want to thank all of you for being here and for sticking with us. Next, you'll meet members of our design committee, and whom you will hear from throughout the panel. And those are first Agustin Cabrera from Scope, Laura Gracia from CBE, Cynthia Strathman and Chelsea Kirk from SAGE, and Megan Ross from the Mayor's Office. And basically the first question, and Cameron Hurt from Lane. The first question I'd like to ask from the panel, if they're all here, is what does equitable climate policy look like to our communities? Agustin, can you start us off?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Marta. Again, my name is Agustin Cabrera. I'm the policy director at Strategic Concepts for Organizing and Policy Education, a grassroots organization in South LA. So really grateful to be here. It's so exciting to see the launch and CEMO finally come to realization. I think equitable climate policy is about elevating the richness and expertise of our communities. That includes renters and workers. When we don't include the lived experiences of the people and communities that are most burdened by climate change, we're really doing a disservice to them and any policy that we deem or that we want to be effective. We have all seen well-intended policies that don't result in meaningful impacts to low-income communities of color and those that have been marginalized. We can change that by really centering their voices in processes like these. But I just want to say that it's not just about inviting people to a meeting or creating a table. We have to intentionally think about how we level the playing field by preparing community members for these conversations. Asking ourselves, what tools do they need? How can we make sure they show up? How do we effectively implement their priorities into actual policies? So lastly, I think just we need to build capacity of our communities and make sure that decision makers and agencies are learning from communities as experts so that we can effectively implement those concerns into policy.
Fabulous. Thank you, Agustin. Cynthia, I'd like to go to you next. Could you add to that?
Sure, I could give a little bit of some specificity to that. I'm with SAGE. We're a 501c3 nonprofit down in South Los Angeles, and we are a membership-based organization. And we've already been talking to a lot of our members who are mostly monolingual Spanish-speaking immigrants and older African Americans about what they would like to see in some of these proposed climate policies. And the first thing that really came up for them was, and this shouldn't be surprising with people who are on the very low income spectrum of society, is that they're really concerned that they not just get run over by policies that were intended to help people, but actually end up harming them. I think second up, they also want to make sure that they aren't left behind by those policies when something good is coming down the pipe. And so those are like two things I think that we always have to keep in mind. How do you keep policies from accidentally harming people? And how do you make sure that the people who really have suffered the most, as a lot of other speakers have mentioned, from the bad effects of climate change, how do we make sure that they benefit? And in particular, we work a lot with tenants, so we're concerned with, in terms of building decarbonization, how might people accidentally be displaced? Because one thing I think we really have to pay a lot of attention to, and I'm talking about unscrupulous landlords, but there's all kinds of other people that could go into this bucket, are people who really are not going to miss an opportunity to make a quick buck from any kind of new policy or climate emergency if they possibly can. And I think always keeping I think what our tenants really said loud and clear is, like, don't forget that there's some unscrupulous people out there who are going to try and take advantage of this situation. So that's my rather dour and downbeat communication for the evening.
Great. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Who'd like to go next? Laura, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Gracia. I use she and they pronouns. I'm with Communities for a Better Environment, and I support our climate adaptation program statewide. We organize in Wilmington and Southeast LA. We have been meeting with our Wilmington community members around this issue. And to go back to your question, we operate under a framework called Just Transition. I hope you hear my dog snoring. She's so loud. It's okay. We operate under a framework of just transition. And one of those things, well, three of those things that I'll touch on right now is deep democracy. And that's why these sessions are so important. And that's why it's so important that we're not just getting feedback from community members, but actively engaging them while creating this plan of how is this going to happen. Then there's a movement of movements, which is so exciting about this panel. Like, we have folks that are experts in so many different issues that are all super relevant to the work that's going to happen. We can't have a conversation about decarbonization or climate solutions without knowing labor perspective, tenant perspective, and environmental justice communities that have been bearing the brunt of the climate crisis and changing the rules. And that's a really exciting thing about this office, right? It's an office that recognizes that environmental justice is real, that environmental racism is real, that there are people that have been historically disenfranchised by systemic oppression. And this office is opening up the space to have this conversation, to prioritize environmental justice communities and building real climate solutions. And all of this is super doable. You know, our youth program is about to celebrate 25 years of being a youth program. And throughout these years, you know, they've built whole parks, they've built policy, they've like been through the implementation of policy. They have, they've carried out lawsuits around oil drilling. And so it's definitely doable as long as there's the intentionality and that we're building trust in communities of color.
Thank you, Laura, so much. All right, Cameron, I'm gonna point to you next.
Thank you, Martha. And my name's Cameron Hurd. I'm a community organizer at the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, also known as LANE. And I'm really happy to be here alongside just the amazing fighters and champions that are on this panel and that introduced this whole session. So like Augustine said, I mean, we can't just have policies that end up with negative impacts or leaving communities behind, especially frontline environmental justice communities. And then much like Martha said at the beginning, equity is the only path forward to building the better communities that we are fighting for, ones that are healthier and safer for people. And we believe that the only way to achieve that, of course, is by having that collaboration between communities, the workers that live in those communities and work in those communities, as well as environmental organizations and all the other types of stakeholders that we believe need to be prioritized. So, of course, we believe in the importance of good jobs and economic stability at LANE because it insulates communities from the shocks of climate change. And if done well, we believe that building performance and decarbonization policies can really help us meet our climate goals in ways that create opportunities for new and good union jobs, protecting and investing in working class families. And we have to make sure that we do so and that we move forward in a way that doesn't burden workers and communities with those economic impacts, but rather it creates opportunities for greater environmental and worker justice. So we see that as a path forward, and that's what can help create new quality jobs for workers in impacted industries while also helping uplift environmental policies that the communities drastically need. And honestly, history has proven that we're strongest when we work together, all of those different organizations.
Thank you so much, Cameron. That's really, words to live by. Megan, I suppose you're next.
Love going last so I can respond to the great words of others and let them come before me. I'm Megan Ross. I'm here on behalf of the LA Mayor's Office of Sustainability, where I'm a climate advisor. And I was really excited that Augustine led off by talking about preparing community members for the conversation, that's a big part of equitable policy. I just want to say that so many of the resources that were used in the preparation for the Building Decarbonization series, which will be going on through March, so many of those were crafted or co-crafted by community experts. I'm super excited that the city is showcasing them in this series. I think largely, equitable policy is really as much about the process as it is about the outcome. Lauren talked about reaching for ambitious outcomes, and we know how much those outcomes matter. You know, they matter today, they matter to our future. You know, but the process of reaching those outcomes matters so much in terms of how people experience them, when people experience them, who experiences them, period. You know, we could ensure that renters have affordable utility costs and energy efficient buildings. That could be a good outcome, you know, but unless we have a process that's rooted in equity, those outcomes won't necessarily be accountable to the people that we're trying to serve. And we won't have a way to ensure that those outcomes continue. And what I like about the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office is that its whole role is to make sure that our process of creating policy supports those continued equitable outcomes for the climate. And, you know, the fact that it was advocated for by community members, its leadership was shaped by community members, the design process for these upcoming meetings was shaped by community members. That's a really different distribution of agency than we've had in the past. And I've just been so thrilled that the mayor asked and supported our staff, including me, to spend my capacity as a city servant in service of that community leadership. And I think this will only work with the continued institutional space for and attention to the leadership of the community. So, you know, many thanks to Councilmember Koretz and the other members of council who worked, you know, who leveraged their positions to make sure this office was institutionalized and that the role of community was institutionalized. That's really what's going to protect our accountability to equity going forward, you know, all the way from conception to implementation.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciate those words about, you know, how we have institutionalized the vision of these wonderful social justice and environmental justice groups in this office. And that kind of leads me to the next question, which some of you already answered in some ways. And the question is, are climate equity and justice necessary to bring about climate solutions? And if so, please explain. And I guess this time I'll start with Chelsea, since she hasn't responded yet. Chelsea?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Kirk. I'm a policy analyst at Strategic Actions for a Just Economy with Cynthia Strathman. Happy to be here. So impressed by this panel. Yes, equity and justice are absolutely necessary. You know, the impacts of climate change aren't distributed equally. Low-income communities of color bear the burden of this climate crisis. They're disproportionately exposed to pollution and rising temperatures, and least prepared to, you know, recover from extreme climate events. And so our response to climate change must really center the needs of these communities. And I also want to add that climate justice is also inextricably linked to housing justice, and both are really necessary to solving climate change. I think so much of how people are impacted by climate change has to do with their home, right? Where it's located geographically, who owns it, the quality of the building, and whether one can actually afford to find a new home in the event of a climate disaster. And so, you know, we know low-income communities of color are least prepared to withstand climate change, and they disproportionately live in these census tracts that are pollution burden, experience the hottest temperatures, and also they live in the, you know, most poor quality housing that isn't at all climate resilient. Many people don't have air conditioning, and better housing isn't available to them. And so it's these communities that really need climate justice. And, you know, let's also not forget that the solution is going to cost money, and we need to make sure that the costs don't fall on the communities who bear the worst burden of this. And so this really isn't possible unless we prioritize climate justice and equity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. So let's just go ahead and chime in whenever you'd like. Make it more, you know, conversational. Step in. And if you'd like, I'd like to reiterate the question. Basically, if you have any examples or anecdotes of how we can convert, you know, climate policy into a more equitable and just so that we can achieve climate solutions for all, please feel free to give us an example of what you think that looks like, or what you've seen or experienced.
Yeah, just sort of kind of like what Chelsea mentioned about how climate justice is so deeply connected to housing justice. I think climate equity and justice is not possible without explicitly talking about racial justice. And I think what's so exciting is that race has been mentioned a lot during this conversation and panel. And so that's kind of like really exciting about how this office is going to take shape in these workshops, but we can no longer ignore race in climate solutions or any other policies. When we don't include racial justice into the climate policy or solutions, it creates additional problems like gentrification, displacement, over-policing, jobs crisis. And so we really need to make sure that race always has always played a role in policy development. And that's why we're so excited to co-sponsor the California Justice 40 with Assemblymember Isaac Bryan. It's been brought up quite a number of times, but really what it would do for folks that may not be familiar with it, it would ensure that federal climate and infrastructure funding flow that comes down from the federal government goes into communities that have been hit hardest by the climate crisis and who, due to racist infrastructure and climate policies, have the greatest need for community investments. And so, just uplifting the California Justice 40 as, a policy that really not only thinks about climate justice, but really about racial justice and undoing some of the harm that our communities have seen for decades now.
Great, thank you, Agustin. Right, I really like how you all are emphasizing the point that it's not that addressing environmental justice and climate equity is, just the morally right thing to do, but it's the necessary thing to do to save our climate and our planet. And the examples that you're providing really uplift that. And I'd like you all to chime in and give me more thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Cameron.
Go ahead.
Yeah, amazing answers from everybody. And I would just say to the first question, yes, yes, and yes is my answer. I mean, of course, we have to engage the work in a way that's fair and inclusive of affected workers, and especially Black and Brown communities that have endured the impact of decades of systemic oppression, not just when it comes to environmental justice, but the many other aspects of what that looks like in this country. And of course, when we don't make plans, or when officials don't make plans with the communities most impacted by the policy in mind, we repeat this system of oppression, creating what are called unintended consequences. But, at a certain point, that's why we are here, is to help provide the sorts of research and analysis and community input that can actually avoid those consequences and, in fact, create positive consequences that are intended and intentional. So we believe that we have to explore strategies to offset any of the potential negative impacts to construction jobs through policies and programs that are developed in consultation with the workers and the labor union representatives for the workers, especially in the building trades impacted by the decarbonization of buildings. And we need to listen to the voices of community and workers and develop plans moving forward with the most impacted in mind, at the front of mind, and not as an afterthought.
Thank you, Cameron. Great. Claudia, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, Cameron definitely touched on it. It's not a mystery anymore why we're in this climate crisis. It's like we know why, it's getting hotter. We know why all of the climate icebergs, all that. But most importantly, we have that expertise on solutions in our communities. Like folks are so resilient, and folks have been leading organizing efforts, for generations now. And so as long as we're moving forward, we need to make sure we're not pushing false solutions. And the best way to avoid false solutions is by being very intentional. We recognize that there have been systemic, that environmental racism is real. And now, how did we get here, and how can we make sure that moving forward, we're not recreating those systems, that we're not continuing to displace communities, that we're not continuing to pollute frontline communities, that we're pushing solutions that are at its core, really undoing a lot of the harm. And so I was just going to repeat what you said. And then, yeah, driving in the fact that there are so many community experts living in our communities. There are folks that know exactly when it rains, that's where it's gonna flood. There are folks that know if it's hot, you go here. there's so much expertise, and we just need to make sure that we're holding that a trustful, a respectful space and an intentional space to really build out climate equity.
Great, thank you, Laura. That's really important. And I just earlier today we were talking about the 3 ambassador program that the city has, and that program is meant to use community wisdom and community ambassadors to ensure that we plant more trees in those areas and that those trees thrive and survive, because it's one of the most effective ways to counteract, the climate hazards of extreme heat in our communities. So I'm absolutely with you there that we need to include the wisdom of our communities, the expertise in our communities, and ensure that they're there designing them, or that they have representatives like yourselves who speak with them frequently, who can help us design those policies and programs to reinvest the funds that hopefully we will be receiving from the federal government to bring directly to our communities. Who hasn't had a chance yet?
And I'd love to actually, Laura's point about being intentional made me think about the comment about, going slow to go fast, or, what I often think of as moving at the speed of trust, which sometimes feels slow, but is a better way to really make progress together. And I think that's how we got here. And I hope that's how we move forward. That's how I want us to move forward, is at the speed of trust, with the ambition and urgency for the climate crisis, but together, and, Martha, your original question was about climate solutions for all. And I think that climate solutions have to go directly to the heart of the problem. And we know where the heart of the problem is. It's in disadvantaged communities, it's in Black communities, it's in Indigenous communities, the communities that have been hardest hit, that are at the real front lines of the climate crisis. And I think that centering climate solutions in those frontline communities is really about addressing the harm that's already been done in those areas of disinvestment, as well as in creating a clean energy future, a good jobs future, the clean air future that extends across our city, no matter what neighborhood you live in, but especially where those neighborhoods have seen dirty air, low quality jobs, dirty energy, as our city has been built up until now. I think that, solutions that skirt past those historical inequities and current inequities are not really solutions for everyone. I think that, what justice looks like in climate solutions is recognizing the unequal impact of the past, and providing better opportunities in the future for health, prosperity, for agency in the process, specifically where they've been unavailable through previous disinvestment.
Thank you so much for that. I think that what I'd like to add is another question, and feel free to answer any other questions that I'm posing. So later in the series, we're going to be talking about how to convert, climate equity metrics and analysis from various reports that are out right now, but also the climate equity measuring tools that we have in California, Los Angeles, and the federal government. How we convert that information and those voices into an operationalized investment into our communities, because we can all have a wonderful definition of equity and justice, but the definition doesn't get us there, right? The principle doesn't get us there unless we figure out a way to operationalize it. And although I fully trust that this blueprint that we're developing together is going to serve as a voice and help to shape equitable climate policy, the next step is implementation and execution, and ensuring that the dollars get to the communities that need it, and all of Los Angeles, frankly, because all of Los Angeles has to be in on this, and we have to be working together. So I guess my question is more, have you all thought about how we could operationalize the federal funds through the state and then the city to get to the most impacted communities of Los Angeles as we're building infrastructure as we're decarbonizing buildings? What does that look like, I wonder? It's a tough question. And I'm not even sure I have the answer to that, but I just wanted to put that out there because that's how serious we are. We want to make sure that we're talking about policy, but also the execution of that policy into real investments for that distributional justice that we hope to see.
I mean, I wouldn't say that I have the answer to your question, but I will say that there is, that's why it's so important to continue working with community-based organizations, because they have gone through the experience of, as I said, pushing policy, advocating for that policy, implementing that policy. So a few examples, and you know, they're not perfect, you know, so there's definitely space to learn, right? And that's why it's important to work with organizations and community. You know, we've learned a lot throughout the SOMA shared solar on affordable housing program, on multifamily affordable housing program. And you know, that was a policy that we were advocating for from the beginning. We are currently implementing in Southeast LA. There's, thinking also about, we have a grant from Strategic Growth Council around resilience hubs in Wilmington. And so we've been partnering with other organizations to really find out what it is that folks need and want in the communities, and are currently in the process of implementing that. I know that's a later session, but these are just two examples of ways that, we were advocating for these funds, and now they're here and we're implementing them. And so I think my point is making sure that we don't lose the fact that community-based organizations already have existing relationships, and there's intentional and trust in communities with organizations, and that's why it's important to continue partnering with organizations to make sure that those intentions are carried out throughout the process.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so.
Sorry, I would just agree with Laura and also say, I think part of what's really important in the implementation process is how we're measuring success. And we're working with community to not only track the progress, but really set goals and make sure that we're intentional about, if through this work, we know that, in certain communities, there's low in EV infrastructure or low solar capacity, that we're creating goals for ourselves in order to make sure that we're creating more of that infrastructure. And so I think it's really important that after these sessions, that we're holding each other accountable and really measuring our success through the work of community-based organizations and those community members that we bring to the table, right, to make sure that we're following up with them about what policies have been created through their guidance and advice.
Thank you, Agustin.
Can I chime in, Marta, before you move on?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I hope that in terms of implementation, this process leads to just a greater range and deeper range of community partnerships in implementation, from the process of creating, policy goals, figuring out how to meet them, implementing them, and tracking them. I mean, community partners should really be at all along the way, And another thing that came to my mind from your question, Martha, was thinking about the role of different levels of government, the role of different types of, and across sectors too, that there's, the county is here. The city of LA is not, it's not a monolith. It's certainly a large city, but we are part of a region. We're part of a state. We have utility structures that we, work within the Public Utility Commission. We have, our state energy code that we have to respond to in our own, local building decarbonization efforts. There's a lot of different levels of cooperation that have to happen. And I think what I've noticed is that, the further you get from your community, the harder it is for the community-based organizations to continue to have that voice, which is why I think it's really important that we've institutionalized them here, so that, as we think about, as the city of LA is thinking about responding to these different sectors, different levels of government, and how we implement solutions, that community priorities are always at the forefront of that, and that communities are prepared to understand and interact with and advocate at those other levels as well, and that the city can set them up to do that successfully.
Great, wonderful, Megan. And I think that you partially responded to a couple of the questions here that we're getting from the chat space. One is, will there be an effort to reach out to others in the San Fernando Valley for their perspectives? And I think the answer to the question is absolutely yes. We're going to be expanding to other parts of the Valley and Los Angeles as a whole, but we need to do it methodically. And this is our first year. And for those of you who don't understand the fiscal cycle of the city, our fiscal year actually ends in July. So we're already planning, how we're going to modify our approaches for next year. So this is really timely. The other question was, are you planning on having businesses at the table as well? For instance, the builders who have implemented the decarbonization policies of small businesses who depend on natural gas because of the low cost. They can provide valuable input to the cost. And the answer is yes. And I'll partially answer it by saying that the Building and Safety Department has asked CEMO for its support, and also via council motion, we're working together. And there will be another series that's going to be dedicated to reaching out to that constituency and getting their input and getting their suggestions as we continue to shape policy for the building performance standards of building decarbonization. So that's going to be definitely addressed for that policy and other future climate policies that affect building owners and tenants. And I don't know if anybody here would like to address either of these questions. The other question is, do you suggest focusing our efforts on areas with the worst CalEnviro screen scores? That's from Commissioner Monica Mejia. And I guess I could start there by saying we definitely prioritized recruiting our commissioners from the top 10% pollution burdened communities of Los Angeles as per CalEnviro screen score. So it has been a priority for us to address those most pollution burdened communities from the beginning. It's in our ordinance that established CEMO, that established the commission. And that is another reason why you have the organizations that are before you in this moment in the panel, because they do represent those communities. Commissioner Mejia, would another panelist like to respond to her question? All right. Well, I just to further answer that question, we mentioned earlier that Pacoima, Wilmington, Boyle Heights, Watts, and other parts of Los Angeles and South Los Angeles have been identified as the most pollution burdened areas of LA. And we definitely want to work towards detoxifying, minimizing pollution, mitigating exposure in those areas, Commissioner Mejia. I think those are, oh, here's another question from Jasmine Vargas, Food and Water Watch. What are the barriers that you face in making sure that climate policy is based on justice and equity, and how will CEMO address these barriers? So let's address the first part first, and then I can answer the second part. What are the barriers that we face in making sure climate policy is just and equitable? Yeah, I would say that the execution is challenging on many levels. One of those levels is obviously it takes a lot of effort to create the kind of structure for community engagement that we need, but CEMO is here to model that and test out the blueprint that we've presented before you today to ensure that we bring in more voices than ever before, and more voices from the most pollution burdened areas than ever before. And then the structure that we mentioned earlier, Jasmine, was that the recommendations and findings from this Climate Equity LA series will go to the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission, which will then help advise councils ordinances and motions and policies as they create climate policy in the city of Los Angeles. So I do think we're modeling that for other cities. And this is the first year and this is the test run. So we hope to not just be successful, but also learn and evaluate what we can do better moving forward. Would anybody else like to address that? I think, Megan, you're well positioned to address what you've seen before as challenging for creating equitable and just policy.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the barriers that faces our city and every city I can think of is chains of communication. You know, the internal policy making relies on existing relationships, and historically, relies on existing relationships, and that to kind of break that chain, break that cycle, you have to have someone who's willing to remove that link and insert a new one. And really like open the circle, not even have a chain to at all to begin with. And I think that that's what I've seen in the recent council action around this particular process, around this office. Is council is saying for building decarbonization, for example, okay, this is important. We know that this is the next big climate step that the city needs to take, but we're not going to ask for specific policy report backs until this process is complete, until we have met with stakeholders and gotten that report through the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission. That's when we will start to see policy drafts come through. And I think that's a big change from conventional ways of operating, which definitely was a barrier to justice and equity, around somebody getting an idea, somebody else filling the need right away, and community members being cut out of the equation. That's just not going to work for equitable climate policy.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can go. So at Sage, we're really, we work with low-income tenants. And I think one of the challenges for us, coming from a tenants' rights organization, we're not often in the climate policy space. And I don't think tenants are at the forefront of people's minds when they think of climate policy. And so we've run into a situation where sort of tenants aren't really being centered in policy design. And it's required a lot of effort to educate on what some of the unintended consequences might be for renters, such as displacement, such as rent burden, and a real analysis of like the landlord-tenant situation on the ground, which a lot of people who are in the climate policy space don't have a lot of knowledge about. And it's hard to just have a few tenant organizations sort of having to educate all sorts of policymakers in all sorts of different policy spaces about that issue. And so that's been a real challenge for us. And the CEMO process has been an incredible way to bring these sort of housing justice principles to the fore and really include us and our voices in this policy space and conversation.
Thank you, Chelsea. That's definitely been a barrier in the past. I think we also have this issue of stakeholder fatigue and CBO fatigue, especially the smaller environmental justice and social justice and tenant rights organizations who are not necessarily funded to the level to be policy advisors on a constant basis, right? So I definitely hear you there that something has to change there to continue to build the capacity of our community-based organizations and others that don't normally foresee this as a role, but now it's become a necessity if we want to integrate and implement and execute more equitable policies overall. Definitely. So I think I see another question here. Are there opportunities in this forum to help address climate impacts attributed to land use policies? Particularly, can input from this process influence zoning and transit policies with LA City and Metro respectively? I think I'll answer that question by saying what I said in the beginning, that these series are prioritized in the beginning of our fiscal year and focus groups and conversations with different organizations. And next year is going to be a different set of policies, or maybe a continuation of some of the policies from this year. So as we hear from residents what their priorities are, then we're going to include them in future Climate Equity LA series and prioritize them for us to be able to help shape that policy. So the answer is perhaps and probably, right? as long as people keep letting us know what their priorities are through this process, Niche, we're going to have your question, and it's going to help inform the Equitable Climate Action Report and Roadmap that we give to the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission. I hope that answers that question. Does anybody want to comment on land use policies or transportation policies as a whole?
I just wanted to make a quick comment.
Sure.
As I was listening to you, I was thinking like, oh, this is, I feel like there's some connection to the previous question, which is some of the barriers. So we've been, CB has been submitting public comment around the community plan, the health and safety element, and, now the environmental justice element. And so I know that the EJ element has like a component of the CEMO to participate. And so I think this is going to be one of the challenges. And I'm excited for us to overcome it, because I feel like we will. I'm hoping that we will. There needs to be strong interdepartmental communication, because there are a lot of players that are going to be involved in this, and making sure that through that we're still involving community members. This is one of the, something that we've been trying to overcome with the Cleanup Green Up ordinance is, community members were very excited about it. It's, there was so much work put into it, and we're still struggling to make sure that, that space is talking to other departments and other offices. And so I think that I'm hoping that it's a challenge that CEMO will overcome easily, that there is strong interdepartmental communication, because it's already kind of an ordinance that we have to. And then also making sure that the feedback that is being received in our listening sessions are being held and remembered throughout all of the other processes that the CEMO will be engaging in.
Great. Well, I see it's 7:29, and I don't want to keep you too much past 7:30 here. And in fact, I want to end at 7:30. So let me first thank everyone here. I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, but we will have a bike rack. We will have recordings. We will list all of the questions that you all asked and send them to all of the participants. And I want to thank you all for being such remarkable, equity-focused organizations and leaders, and for training others and building the capacity of others to expand their voices and be included in this process. I'm extremely excited about the future of innovating governance through our process and through the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission to get to the point where we truly invest with mechanisms that are meaningful and real, and we see the changes in our communities, and they can say, I was a part of this. So thank you so very much to everyone here, everyone who participated, for your wise comments. And I really look forward to working with all of you in the days to come and in the years to come. Thank you so much. And with that, I guess we conclude our evening, but you will be hearing from us again out there in the audience and the participants. Like I said earlier, we also want to invite you back to the rest of the Building Decarbonization series for March. We have the Community Climate Resilience and Adaptation series in April, and we have the Climate Equity Metrics in May. So hope to see you all there. Thank you and have a great evening.